The assassination of a Hamas leader, the collapsed ceasefire talks, and the dire humanitarian crisis in Gaza. We will take a look at the situation in the Middle East. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. The political leader of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, was assassinated in Tehran. No country or group claimed responsibility for the killing, but Hamas has blamed Israel. Turning to Gaza itself, the Red Cross describes a scene of unbearable tragedy. The agency says famine is looming and the healthcare system has collapsed. Polio is sweeping across the territory, according to the World Health Organization. Large parts of the territory have been turned into rubble. As the Israeli army advances, 86% of the territory is under evacuation orders. Having nowhere to go, many are seeking shelter in places like prisons and even cemeteries. We begin with this report from Nadera Al-Tibi in Gaza.
As the Israelis war in the Gaza Strip nears the 10-month mark, the crisis of displaced Palestinians continues to worsen and their numbers increase by the day. Shahir Abu Aish was forced to move with his wife and 4 children from the north of Gaza Strip towards the south, repeatedly moving from one place to another in search of safety. Eventually, he resorted to taking refuge in the cells of a former prison in the city of Khan Younis.
Our first displacement began from Jabalia camp to the city of Rafah. Then we moved to the central area. After that, I found no place other than to live in Asda prison. At least here there is a concrete roof to protect us and a bathroom that we can use. This is better than our life in a tent, despite the harsh conditions here.
Yasmin El-Fojo, a mother of 5, had fled her home in Khan Younis and returned to find it reduced to rubble. She described to CGTN how she saw living among the dead as her only option.
We lived in the cemeteries. There is no safety here, either for me or my children. Not only us, many of the families who are displaced with us to live here inside the cemetery. We and the dead have become the same. My children cannot sleep at night because of fear.
According to the United Nations, more than 1.9 million Palestinians have been displaced in Gaza since the conflict began last October.
The displaced Palestinians are living in the hardest possible conditions, suffering from fear, hunger, and risk of diseases. After 9 months of the war, Nadera Al-Tibi, CGTN, Southern Gaza Strip.
To discuss the situation in Gaza, we welcome Dr. Mustafa Barghouti. He is president of the Palestinian Medical Relief Society and founder and leader of the Palestinian National Initiative. Dr. Barghouti, thanks so much for joining us. First, let me start talking about the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, the Hamas political leader. He was assassinated in the Iranian capital, Tehran. What are your thoughts on this assassination and its impact?
This assassination represents a grave, criminal, cowardly political assassination. And it was done by Netanyahu and his government because they want to destroy any potential or possibility for a ceasefire. And they are trying to drag the whole region into a regional war. The fact that they've committed 2 assassinations in 24 hours, one in Beirut and one in Tehran, is nothing but an indicator that they want to drag the whole region into a serious confrontation. What the world must know is that this Israeli government has become a fascist government, and its behavior is absolutely fascist. Not only because it is conducting this terrible genocide in Gaza and the acts of criminal collective punishment, but also because it is destroying any potential or possibility for calm, for a ceasefire, and for any opening for peace in the region. That's why the world must deal with this government in a completely different way. It has to be sanctioned, it has to be punished for the crimes it is committing around the clock.
Dr. Barghouti, I want to turn now to the humanitarian situation in Gaza, and let's listen to part of a statement that was made by Sigrid Kaag, who is the UN Senior Humanitarian and Reconstruction Coordinator for Gaza. This is what she had to say. Let's listen.
The war has not merely created the most profound of humanitarian crises, it has unleashed a maelstrom of human misery.
So, Dr. Barghouti, as we said in our opening remarks, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza has reached catastrophic proportions. What are your assessments of what is happening in Gaza right now, almost 10 months after almost continuous Israeli bombardment of that territory, both from the air and both from its land-based weaponry?
You know, we have 45 medical teams working there and treating about 200,000 patients every month. And they report to us horrifying stories. Not only 50,000 people have been killed by Israeli bombardment, including 17,000 children, and more than 90,000 people injured, many of whom will not be able to receive medical care because Israel destroyed most of the hospitals and most of the clinics, and killed more than 306 of our colleagues, the doctors, the nurses, the health professionals. Additionally, Israel is actually causing very serious humanitarian disaster by providing the conditions for the spread of diseases. Our colleagues told us that we have now 1.6 million people sick in Gaza, 72,000 with infectious hepatitis. There is a very serious risk of the spread of poliomyelitis among children. And there is already several cases of meningitis. So Israel is killing people not only with bombardment, but also by depriving them of food and clean water and killing them with diseases as well. That's the reality. People have no shelter. They've been bombarded and pushed from one place to another 5, 6, 7, 8 times. The people have no food, no shelter, no sufficient medications, and they suffer terribly, in addition, of course, to the terrible psychological distress. This is the worst humanitarian crisis ever caused by mankind. It's the worst man-made humanitarian crisis. And that's what was described. And that's what we have there. And this will not stop unless there is a complete and total ceasefire, unless Israel gets its military out of Gaza and allow people to receive sufficient humanitarian aid as soon as possible.
Right, as you say, people have no shelter. 86% of Gaza is now under evacuation orders, those evacuation orders coming from the Israelis. Where can people be evacuated to? Can they find refuge anywhere in Gaza?
Absolutely not. We know that Israel's original plan was eviction of people from Gaza and ethnic cleansing, but there is no place to go to. Now you have no less than 1.6 million people stuck in a very small strip between Khan Yunis and Rafah near the sea. They have no place to go to except to jump into the sea, which is still also bombarded by Israeli boats. So these people are in a very small area with no shelters, as I said, in very horrible conditions. The temperature is very high. They don't have water. They don't have sufficient food. And at the same time, they are bombarded regularly. Every safe zone that Israel claimed to be there was also bombarded. So now people are in total chaos. They don't know what to do. They don't know where to go. I receive calls regularly from people who are telling me, we just lost everything. And we don't know what to do. We don't know where to go. We don't know how we can save ourselves or save our children. And there is no family in Gaza that did not lose some of its members. 6% already of the population of Gaza have been killed or injured. Had this happened in the United States, proportionally, you would be talking about 20 million people killed or injured in less than 9 months.
Israel blames the high number of Palestinian civilian casualties on Hamas, which it says is using civilians as human shields. What do you make of that?
This is ridiculous. This is so ridiculous. How could Hamas use anybody as human shield when you are stacking and pushing 1.6 million people in a very little strip of land? They're all human shield. Everybody is a human shield in Gaza. This is crazy. What they are talking about is absolute nonsense. Sometimes they say that Hamas is hiding in the tunnels and leaving people alone. And sometimes they say that Hamas is using people as human shields. It's all false. There is no justification in the world for killing 17,000 innocent children. No justification for killing so many women. No justification for not allowing 60,000 pregnant women to have a safe place to give birth in.
What do you make of the fact that the United States Congress last week welcomed the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to its joint chamber? It was a very effusive welcome. We saw that on television. They gave him more than 50 standing ovations as he recited even what the United States media has called a litany of provable lies over what is happening in Gaza. Netanyahu was also given an audience with the United States President, President Biden, as well as Vice President Kamala Harris.
This American support to Netanyahu is why he is proceeding with his war crimes. That's why he committed assassinations in Tehran and in Beirut and continues the genocide in Gaza. Just minutes ago, his planes bombarded two journalists who were just reporting, Al Jazeera journalists, and decapitated one of them and killed the other as well. Netanyahu feels totally supported by the United States. And of course, we know that 128 members of the Congress and Senate refused to even attend his speech, and that is good. But on the other hand, those who attended his speech and gave him all this applause are complicit and participants in the war crimes that Israel is committing. And we know very well why they gave him such applause. Because each of them is committed to those who are paying them money from the Israeli AIPAC lobby. It's very well known. It's a shameful thing, which shows that the whole political system in the United States is under big question mark. Is that what democracy means? That a war criminal would be invited to the highest place in the American political system and allowed to be giving lies after lies after lies? His whole speech was nothing but lies. He lied about everything. And the worst lie was his claim that when they invaded Rafah, there was not a single civilian casualties. I think the pictures and images are very clear about what really happened there, especially the images of children that his army killed in Rafah.
Dr. Mustafa Barghouti, thank you for joining us. To continue our conversation, let's bring in our panel. From Jerusalem, Sara Yael Hirschhorn is a historian and political analyst. Michael Lynk is Professor Emeritus of Law at Western University and a former UN Special Rapporteur for the human rights situation in the Palestinian territories. He joins us from Ontario in Canada. And here in Washington, D.C., Khalil Jashan is Executive Director of the Arab Center. Welcome to all of you. Sara, I want to start with you, and I want to get your response to the assassination of the Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh. He was assassinated, as I said, in Tehran. Now, no country, no group, no individual has claimed responsibility for this killing, but what are the implications for Israel?
Look, I think most suspect that it was Israel that has assassinated Ismail Haniyeh, and I understand that he was a very bad man, and Israel obviously saw an opportunity to take out a targeted assassination of a terrorist who was one of the masterminds of 10/7 and has, been behind, any number of terrorist attacks against Israel and a leading figure within the Hamas Politburo. But I am concerned about reaching Israel's arm into the heart of Tehran to take out a Hamas leader. Whether we can debate, whether this was, I don't think there's any debate that he was an extremely evil man, but whether Netanyahu here has miscalculated in terms of launching a strike that will induce a retaliation from Tehran itself that will be so severe against Israeli citizens and also, of course, against the hostages that are still being held in Gaza is of deep concern. I believe that the attack in Lebanon against the targeted assassination that happened last night in Lebanon against one of the chief Hezbollah leaders seemed like a continuation of the tit for tat that has gone on. Of course, a terrible a terrible massacre of 12 children in Majid Shams that really required a response against an Iranian-backed proxy. But it is something of a different story to strike deep into the heart of Tehran and not expect there to be an escalation of events.
Khalil Jashan, what are your thoughts on the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh? We just heard there, Sarah said he was an evil man and one of the primary architects of what happened on October 7th.
I think basically the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh is definitely an escalation in the fighting. I don't think it's going to pass, if you will, without a response from the other side. So in that sense, it's very worrisome considering already 10 months of savage warfare that cost huge numbers of victims, exceeding probably 40,000 people on the Palestinian side, most of whom are civilians, plus the injured and so on, and the displacement of a huge population in Gaza. So number two, I would say, I mean, Israel knew it and they probably avoided it in the past, that Israel itself is not immune to assassination. So essentially this act of desperation by Netanyahu going home directly empowered by the warm reception he had in Congress last week here in Washington and embark on an adventure of this sort, I think puts Israel also in a serious predicament. And that's probably why the hesitation we just heard from Sarah it does make sense in the sense that the region deteriorating in that direction is not going to leave a lot of parties, let's say, safe or immune from such attacks in the future. We've seen those trends in the past, and we hope that they were behind us. But at any rate, coupled with the operation in Beirut,
right.
I think definitely today we are much closer to war in the region than we have been over the past 10 months.
Michael, I want to turn now to another development over the past few days, something that you are very familiar with. The International Court of Justice ruled on July 19th that Israel's 57-year occupation of Palestinian territories is a violation of international law. Up to now, the annexation, the formal annexation of East Jerusalem, as well as the building of settlements on occupied territories, have been declared illegal. So what is the significance of this latest ruling?
In effect, this takes us to another level. You're absolutely right. Up until now, we knew that many aspects of Israel's 57-year-old occupation were illegal. The annexation of East Jerusalem, the building of the settlements, as you said, the construction of a wall through the occupied territory, the many human rights violations that Israel has been committing and documented by the United Nations. The difference in the ICJ decision from 19th of July is that it now says the entire occupation itself is illegal, and that Israel must end the occupation completely. This is the words of the ruling, and as rapidly as possible. So that means that all of the occupied territories, East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and Gaza, will have to be evacuated by Israel. It means the end of the 300 or more Israeli settlements in East Jerusalem and the West Bank, and the evacuation of the 740,000 or 750,000 Israeli settlers living in the occupied Palestinian territory. This will be the new benchmark, I think, if negotiations ever wind up resuming again. It means, if you like, an end to the Oslo framework, which is built always on realpolitik, i.e., a stronger occupying power and the very weak occupied people. And the question always then was, how much do the Palestinians have to negotiate for how much territory, occupied territory, Israel gets to keep? How many settlements does it get to keep? Now we have, in fact, a new framework, a rights-based framework based on international law that, if applied by the international community, would change dramatically the dynamics of this occupation and the dynamics of how we end it.
Sarah, there certainly has been a lot going on. We had that ruling, and then we had Prime Minister Netanyahu, who was in Washington. He addressed a joint sitting of the United States Congress. He was enthusiastically welcomed by Congress members. He got standing ovations, dozens of standing ovations. But we did hear afterwards from many analysts and commentators here in the United States say that although he was here in Washington, this address was primarily aimed at Israelis back in Israel. How was that address received in Israel?
So actually, I think most people in Israel don't think that that address was aimed at Israelis at all, that in fact was based on shoring up the U.S.-Israel relationship. Of course, Netanyahu's speech came at a very awkward time, right as President Biden was unable to meet him because of his COVID-19 infection. And subsequently, we learned that Biden himself was going to announce that he was stepping down at the end of his term and Kamala Harris would be the incumbent Democratic candidate. And I think that Netanyahu's speech was really pitched towards discussing the future of the U.S.-Israel relationship writ large, including shared challenges and strategic and places where the U.S.-Israel relationship is clearly diverging, amongst them what to do about Iran and Iranian-backed proxies, and also to meet, former President Trump, and also to anticipate what may happen if there is a Trump presidency, rather than really relating to the deep concerns of Israelis. It really didn't strike any tone that resonated with what Israelis are concerned about, which is primarily concluding a hostage deal, which now looks even more dire in light of today's strike in Tehran, and domestic concerns. There's been a lot of news here this week about far-right activists, about continuing instability in the economy, about the continuation of the war, the possibility of a second front of the war in Lebanon. And none of these issues are really addressed in that speech in a way that appealed to Israelis and in domestic concerns. This was really a speech aimed at the future of the U.S.-Israel relationship, to my mind.
Khalil Jashan, what do you make of that address by the Israeli Prime Minister? It was filled, even U.S. media that's aligned with Israel said that it was filled with falsehoods. As we heard, that no civilians were killed in that Rafah offensive by Israel. Practically none, the Prime Minister said. He also said Israel had allowed 40,000 aid trucks into Gaza. What do you make of those claims?
The speech definitely was a declaration of war more than an attempt to iron out differences with the administration. It was at one point floated by the Prime Minister's office that he's here to try to fine-tune, if you will, some of the disagreements with the Biden administration pertaining to ongoing negotiations. But then the speech essentially put an end to that. I mean, he was talking about essentially a declaration of war. He was not talking about reconciliation. He did not amend his reservations, let's say, or his conditions for proceeding with the negotiations. It was full of denialism, classic examples of denialism. No to targeting of civilians, no to displacement of civilian population, no to using starvation as a weapon of war, no to restrictions on humanitarian supplies to Palestinians. As a matter of fact, listening to him, you would think that Palestinians in Gaza are overfed. I mean, he specifically mentioned even the number of calories. That he was kind of doing the Palestinians a favor. I don't know why then we should be seeing all these starved babies on television screens for months after months now. So it didn't make sense at all if he came to Washington to iron out difficulties with the administration. Besides, I think actions speak louder than words. He went home and used his speech essentially immediately, the moment he landed. Where did he go? I mean, he only went home for maybe to take a shower for a couple of minutes, but he proceeded to the war room to basically engage in this campaign of assassination that we've learned since, and to escalate the chances of war in the region instead of the chances for peace. And this is why he came to Washington.
Killing of the 12 children in between. He rushed home because of the rocket attack in Majal Shams.
But Sarah, you know very well Israel. I've been in Majd al-Shams. You've probably been in Majd al-Shams. These are not Israeli citizens. These are Syrian citizens that Israel never really cared about. All of a sudden, using that as a fig leaf to basically activate the northern front is nonsense. When a country has more than 80,000 people that have been displaced, Israelis that have been displaced from the north, to add fuel to the fire and pretend all of a sudden Israel is the defender of the Druze community in the Golan, when these people even refuse to carry Israeli passports. It doesn't make sense. It's not logical at all. It's an excuse to basically escalate. So I would say his speech to me was a blueprint for escalating this conflict, which he did every minute. As soon as he got back home, this is Netanyahu. Basically, he is willing to sacrifice not only Israel, but to sacrifice everything for his own personal career.
Michael, of course, this address took place right in the middle of the final stages of the presidential campaign here in the United States. I mean, none of the main candidates running for president in the United States has shown any marked difference in terms of policy on how they would resolve this crisis. Do you see any major change after the election?
I don't, with respect to this. I mean, Kamala Harris, should she be elected, has been an integral part of Joseph Biden's team during the past 3.5 years. It's said that she had urged a better tone with respect to sympathy towards the Palestinians, but in terms of being able to display any political weight to change the Biden administration's policy of almost full backing for Israel during the course of this 10-month war. Remember that President Ronald Reagan, 42 years ago, after 8 weeks of a war that had killed roughly 18,000 Palestinians and Lebanese, had told Menachem Begin in late August, this is over, and it was over the following day. We've now gone on for over almost 10 months with respect to this, and I must say myself, having looked at as these numbers of deaths were escalating over the past 10 months, I kept on saying, surely this is enough. Surely the world is going to put a bright red line. Surely the Americans are going to say enough is enough, even as Israel's sinking reputation in the international community has been dragging the United States with it, particularly in the Middle East. So I'm not sure we'd see a substantive change by a President Harris. I certainly think we know what we'd get with a new President Trump. It would be probably more of the same with respect to green lights for formal annexation of parts of the Palestinian territory, with the Palestinians allowed to have a little statelet or Bantustan with respect to this, and probably very little restraint with respect to any future wars or conflicts that this far-right government would engage in.
Sarah, we're also seeing divisions emerging in Israel itself on how this war is being conducted. Israeli protesters stormed an Israeli base, a military base, to try to stop the detention there of soldiers who'd been accused of abusing Palestinian prisoners. I mean, there have also been several reports in the Israeli media as well of prisoners being tortured by forces in Israel. I mean, how is the government responding to this?
Government isn't responding at all. Thus far, Benjamin Netanyahu has not made any statement regarding the storming of the prison or the military court. I mean, we should be reminded that this was, a few dozen activists, but they are activists that are associated with far-right political parties in Israel, and included in at least one case a member of parliament himself, Tzvi Zucot, who appeared at the prison to hear the full details of the allegations made against these soldiers. But in terms of the actual, the protests outside of these facilities, I doubt we will be hearing anything. And especially now when Netanyahu is trying to present himself as Mr. Security, and in the war cabinet, he does not want to, he doesn't want to upset the apple cart of his coalitional partners at this critical moment, especially one where he looks once again in full control and in charge. So it's a very unfortunate reality that Netanyahu has sacrificed many of the ideals of a democratic Israel to his political necessities.
Okay, that is where we are going to have to leave it. Thank you to all of you for being with us. And that's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C.